Yes, we are all sluts. You're a slut. All these dudes behind you are sluts. Your cameraman's a slut. Your PA's a slut. And your mic's a slut.
And what made you a slut?
Because I own my body. My body is not a political playground. It's not a place for legislation. It's mine and it's my future. And
so there we have activist and model Samira Rahim's definition of slut at the SlutWalk 2017. We thought we'd open with her reclaiming of the word to open our presentation on the analysis of the success of the global movement of the SlutWalk. While I run through the etymology of the word slut, we would love it if everyone could comment on our video or in the Zoom chat on what the word slut means to you, the context you've heard it in, and how the word makes you feel. The word slut is most often used in a modern context to degrade a woman for having too much sex or for acting in a way that does not align with the societal ideas of a passive, pure, and chaste woman. The origin of the word is thought to be Germanic, coming from schlut, meaning dirty woman. This relates to the modern usage of the word, as often women who have a lot of sex, who are passive ideals of womanhood, are considered impure or dirty, as if sex in some way corrupts them and makes them less perfect and pure. Modern usage of the term slut demonstrates how women are seen as sexual objects, but are also expected to not have their own sexual desires. It was this definition of slut that we see the march or walk organised around. There are many angles we could examine the slut walk from, as you can see here. Please feel free to ask us about these areas of analysis later, but for the time being, we wish to focus on whether the slut walk movement can be understood as a global success or failure. Now on over to Ursula.
So SlutWalk was born in reaction to a statement made by a police officer at a campus safety event at a Toronto law school, which you can see to the left of the screen. This prompted Sonia Barnett and Heather Jarvis to organise a protest against the victim blaming intrinsic to rape culture and to reclaim the derogatory word slut and redefine it as a term which celebrates women's control of their sexuality. The first protest took place in April 2011 in Toronto and was attended by 3,000 people, some choosing to wear very few clothes, others deliberately opting for the everyday outfits they were wearing when they were sexually assaulted in order to communicate the message that sexual assault isn't caused by how women dress. Part of the appeal of SlutWalk is that it is grounded in a homogenous conception of women united by a common goal of challenging slut-shaming and victim blaming. In this way, SlutWalk engaged with what the scholar Gayatri Spivak calls strategic essentialism, a political method in which a group mobilizes on the basis of a shared essentialist foundation of identity that allows for the achievement of a certain political goal. SlutWalk can be seen as an example of a movement motivated by what Molyneux calls practical interests, with women mobilizing in order to meet their most pressing needs. Thanks to social media, the movement gained international recognition and inspired activism all over the world. Today, we're going to focus on how the Slut Walk was manifested in Canada, where it originated, and India as an example of how the movement played out in a non-Western context. In doing this, we'll consider how the Slut Walk engages with globalization, the idea of thinking globally and acting locally. In this case, taking the global problem of rape culture and applying it to a local context. So we could move on to the next slide, please. So in Canada, SlutWalk garnered critique from women of colour. In its conception of women as a homogenous entity rallying behind a common cause, SlutWalk ostracised women of colour. This is highlighted in how SlutWalk organisers communicated the need for Toronto police to regain our trust, to reassure survivors of sexual assault that their experiences will be taken seriously and that they will be treated with respect. This statement overlooks the unique and complex relationship that women of colour have had with the police throughout history and makes the unfounded assumption that all women would wish to collaborate with the police force. As one woman of colour, Aura Bogado, wrote in response to this, our communities, meanwhile, have never trusted the police to begin with. So in using the collective determiner our, the organisers assume a common experience of womanhood that simultaneously functions to exclude Black women's experiences. This reinforces the point that Oyerunke Oyewumi makes, that when we talk about women as a collective group, we are almost exclusively talking about white women, and thus failing to see how the intersections of various identities shape women's lives in a way that makes a universal experience of biologically determined womanhood impossible. Gender isn't only a social construction, but is historically grounded and culturally bound. As Judith Butler writes in Gender Trouble, the category of woman is produced and restrained by the very structures of power through which emancipation is sought. So SlutWalk garnered further critique from women of colour in its preoccupation with the reclamation of the term slut. In an open letter to the organisers of SlutWalk, the Black Women's Blueprint point out that beliefs surrounding Black women's sexuality are racialised and are therefore completely different to those that surround white women's sexuality. They assert that we do not see our lived experiences reflected within the SlutWalk, and especially not in its brand and its label. Echoing this, a post on the Crunk Feminist Collective argues that racialised conceptions of Black women's sexuality have led to the assumption that, quote, we are always already sexually free, insatiable, ready to go, and by consequence, unrapeable, end quote. Therefore, quote, to reclaim slut as an empowered experience of sexuality, end quote, does not speak to the Black women's experience. The author argues that the placing of the reclamation of the term slut at the centre of the movement's activism is an exercise of white privilege. So these critiques highlight how in failing to employ an intersectional approach to its ideology and activism, SlutWalk failed women of colour. So I'm going to pass over to Beth now, who's going to discuss how the movement manifested in India.
So the SlutWalk movement claimed to be a global phenomenon, moving out of the global north to countries like Brazil, El Salvador, Hong Kong, and where we're picking to focus today, India. The message of the SlutWalk as aiming to empower women and call attention to their frequent sexual assault meant it could be adapted in any society that women's sexuality was policed in. India is an interesting example, as while its national media seemed to claim the movement a failure, internationally, India's participation was used to demonstrate the success of the movement and its ability to go global. India was successful in adapting the movement to local needs. For instance, they renamed it the Shameless Front to call out the way women are policed by shame and the cultural concept of shame, specifically the amount of shame that sexual assault carries. Additionally, this was because the English word slut was not used in this context. They also talked, instead of about sexual assault, about eve teasing, an Indian term for sexual assault. The first march in Bhopal was labelled a failure. Online, over 2,000 people interacted with the group, but on the day, only around approximately 50 people were in attendance. This was deemed demonstrative of the march's lack of relevance in Bhopal and therefore India. It was not interrogated further as to why women were so keen to support the movement online, but not in public. New Delhi, on the other hand, march was much more popular. According to Mitra, it brought discussions of the assault of women into mainstream media, starting conversations about the secret shame women had to bear for years. According to Mitra, the need for attention to eve teasing is demonstrated in how policy was already responding to its occurrence. For instance, the New Delhi Metro, there was already certain cars restricted to just female passengers. However, despite these attempts to keep women safe, there was not a wider discourse on why women felt safe, and the cultural situation that created the need to keep women safe was not being interrogated at the individual level or the political level. The march served to bring this into wider attention. In Bangalore, the march was cancelled the day before due to claims it would incite violence and a belief that it wasn't part of Indian culture anyway. Many groups complained about the march before its occurrence, including women's advocate groups, who were worried about a lack of conservatism. Thus, we can see from the Indian context how grassroots groups capitalised off the media attention of the SlutWalk to draw attention to cultural sexual assault as they experienced it. Though the Western movement gave them an international spotlight and a starting point to organise from, it was also this Western connection that was India's movement's major source of criticism, as despite it being culturally applied to their own local needs, the movement could not shake its Western origins, and the negative media attention it had gained in US and Canada, for example, as being a spectacle of disrespectful, half-naked women. The concern for the shameless women who took part actually served to support patriarchal assumptions that women's bodies need to be controlled and contained by wider society. There was a common belief that a good Indian woman would not even be participating in such a protest in the first place. Thus, the movement in India was a mixed failure and success. It did fail to engage with the wider system of injustice that produces the high rates of sexual assault. Now on to Louise for our evaluations.
So, evaluating and comparing the two cases of SlutWalk in Canada and India, the movement has clear advantages and disadvantages. One of SlutWalk's greatest achievements is the amount of mass media attention it garnered, putting sexual abuse, rape, and victim blaming at the centre of public discourse, as well as the reframing of the word slut and other sexist language alike. For many people, SlutWalk was one of the first feminist movements to engage them in the topic of feminism because of its aesthetic appeal. We agreed that SlutWalk fits into the era of lipstick feminism, a variety of third-wave feminism that seeks to embrace traditional concepts of femininity, including the sexual power of women. SlutWalk was a source of empowerment for many women, giving some the encouragement they needed from the community to talk about their sexual experiences for the very first time. SlutWalk is a global movement. By the power of social media, it was able to globally enter other contexts, and its layout was adaptable to an extent for the cultural needs of other communities. SlutWalk have been accused of being exclusionary to women of colour, and whilst this is unacceptable, SlutWalk did choose to acknowledge the inequalities within the movement, apologising for them and claiming that they will try and do better, although this issue never seemed to improve. SlutWalk has always been geared towards the idea of white feminism, ignoring the other identities and feminist ideas of non-white people, LGBTQ+ people, and less able-bodied people. SlutWalk's idea of what a woman is puts women into one essentialist biological category, which is in no way relatable to many who would have wanted to take part or did take part and felt actively uncomfortable. SlutWalk was unable to shake its Western origins, and even in other countries such as India, it still felt like a foreign concern, with a very Westernized agenda, despite it being organised at a grassroots level in every context. SlutWalk as a feminist movement has very unclear goals. The aim of the marches remains unclear as they are not campaigning for any particular legal reform. Now moving on to conclusions and recommendations based off these disadvantages. The SlutWalk, after its peak, became very quiet as a feminist activist movement. There are very few to no SlutWalks or protests currently being organised or that have been organised in the past few years. We believe that this is a reflection of their inability to keep up with the demands of modern feminism, a lack of organisation and responsibility for their actions, and the result of having unclear objectives as a movement. Weighing up the advantages and disadvantages of the movement, we have some recommendations for SlutWalk, which we believe would enable it to run with more care for the movement's members and towards a clearer goal. We recommend, in order to make the march more intersectional, a gay pride style strategy. Participants would be able to have the choice to either march within the mixed crowd or would apply for a ticket within a specific block. Blocks aren't pre-created. Any group may enter as a block. Blocks are usually made up of groups from different faith communities, sexualities, or nationalities. If a participant wouldn't feel comfortable marching within the general crowd, they could choose to march with a group of people alike, removing the feeling of potentially being out of place. We also believe that SlutWalk needs clearer objectives. Whilst they claim to be a protest group, they are not known to be demanding policy reform. We recommend a focus on legal reform for practical change. This includes protests outside of courts and potentially a focus on individual rape and victim blaming cases. This would give SlutWalk a more concise purpose, and it could potentially benefit women and others who are sexually abused nationwide if successful. Thank you for listening to our presentation, and we will now take any questions.